Hey everyone, welcome back to another lesson. So let's go ahead and create our calculator in this one. Now what I want to do in this one is I want to actually just do it with you, mainly because this one is going to be a little bit of a clever slash maybe a little bit complicated one, and I thought it would be a good idea to just kind of explain it and have you do it with me as you go. So you can either watch the video or you can just try to do it by yourself first and see how you do. So the idea with this is that we want to create a calculator that receives two inputs from the user and also an operation and calculates the results. So we want to get two inputs, first and second number, right? And also we want to get another input, which is the operation, basically plus, whether we're going to add it, subtract it, divide it, multiply it, whatever we want to do. So we want to receive that also as an input. That's very, very important. So because if you actually think about the calculator, let me just pull one real quick. So the way a calculator works is, again, we have the number, like first number and then plus second number, right? And then we have these operators, right? The plus, all that stuff. These are actually, separate. So what I want us to do is I want us to receive this in a separate value as well. And, we want to take this, we want to use dictionaries. That's another thing. And I'm going to tell you why. And again, there are different ways to do this. And keep in mind, if you've done it by yourself and you feel like, you can do it without watching this video, that's completely fine. And again, we're going to use dictionaries and we're going to use functions with inputs and outputs as well. So a few things I want to mention. First of all, if you want to access these files, there are the files in the resources section. So the first one is the starter file, which is going to be empty like this. And the second one is going to be the completed version, basically with the solution. So let's actually think about this real quick. All right. So I want to receive three inputs. Again, separate functions for each operation and join them later. All right, so that's all the stuff that we wanted. So first, let's actually think about it. I'm going to say separate. I just want to kind of lay out what I want to achieve here. Okay, separate functions for each operation and join them later. And let me tell you why I want to do this. Because we're receiving the operation itself as a separate input, right? Because we need to figure out what input user wants to go with, right? Whether they want to add something, they want to divide something, whatever they want to do. So we need to get that input. So we need to put them in a separate function by itself, right? And then, we want the user to enter first and second number, right? And user can also use the results as for a different calculation, because if you think about it, a calculator, the way it works out, for example, if I add 25, or let's say 25 plus 10, it's 35, right? One of the things I can do is I can add this 35 to maybe another number like 60, for example. So I can use the previous number. So we want to make sure that we can use the previous number as well. So user can use the results for another calculation. All right, and also, or user can also clear it, right? All right, so we got the clear function, so we just want to import the clear function right off the bat, and let's go ahead and start. And again, I'm going to run through everything that is going on in my mind here. All right, so with that being said, let's get it started. So the first thing I'm going to do, since we got the clear function, and this is something that you have to run in the first thing, right? The first top of your script essentially. So I'm just going to say from replit, in this case, import clear. So that way we are importing the clear function. All right. So the first thing I want to do is I want to define these functions. Now, what I'm thinking is that what we can do is that we can define these separate functions for each operation, okay? And what we do is that we replace these operations, and we also define these operations inside a dictionary, right? And later on, when we want to calculate, we replace these, numbers, these names, operations with names. Let me explain what I mean by that. I think I'm not being very clear about this. So I'm going to define, add, for example, right? We're going to say n1, n2, and we're going to keep it very united, all right? So we're going to keep it very like similar. So this is the add function, right? And I'm going to say return is going to be n1 plus n2. So that way, again, this function is going to have an output. The inputs are actually n1 and n2, or these are the numbers, right? Number 1, number 2, and the output is going to be number 1 plus number 2. So that's like the first one. So let's add another one, define another one. I'm going to call this subtract, all right? And I'm going to do the same thing, n1, n2, and we're going to say return n1 minus n2. Perfect. All right, so let's do another one again. Multiply, all right, and I'm going to say n1, n2, and we're going to return n1, n2. Perfect. All right, so that's our multiply. And what else we got? Divide, right? So define divide. All right, so we're going to say n1 divided by n2. Oh, well, that's our inputs, and then n1 divided by n2. All right, so that, well, let's make sure it returns. Here we go. So just like that, we got our basic functions. All right, now what I'm thinking, let's actually add another thing that we need to add, and that is our operations. All right, so we're gonna have a dictionary here. I'm gonna say operations, okay, and we're gonna say and define each and every single one. So we're gonna say plus, or that's, you know, adding, right? And I'm going to give this a value of add. So as see what I'm doing here is that, guys, I'm adding a key, right, and then a value. So that's how it works. And again, the first, and then that's the second one, minus, which is like, you know, we want to subtract. And same thing, I'm going to say subtract. All right, and we're going to add another one, which is going to be multiply, right? Multiply. And the last one, we're going to say divide. All right, so here's what I'm thinking. So I'm thinking that, so we got this dictionary, right? And we got this, you know, the string, which is the actual the sign of it, the character. And then we got the add, subtract, multiply. This is the key, and this is the value. And what I'm thinking is that we create a function where if the user enters, for example, plus, right? If the user chooses plus, what we're going to do is we're going to replace this, the key or the value of this key, with a function. So again, if they want to add, for example, we call this add function. If they want to subtract, we call this subtract function, because we got the actual value here, right? The actual value as a, you know, as a key in this dictionary. So again, we can replace this. For example, if they want to multiply, we say multiply, you know, define multiply this, and then, you know, calculate it like that. So that's what I'm thinking. You know, we replace essentially the value of this, you know, whatever user enters based on the key in the dictionary, we replace that value with this function, and, you know, we just run it. Very simple. That's how we call the function. So that's basically the whole idea behind this program. All right. So again, the operations, you know, it's a dictionary, it stores a function, and we're going to call it later on, right? We call the multiply function, whatever function. So with that being said, let's go ahead and think about how do we do this. So the first thing we want to do is, because again, this is, you know, something that user can clear, and also user can use the results for another calculation if they want to. Remember that this is going to be a, you know, this is going to be something that is going to run forever, right? And run as long as possible. And that is where the while loop comes in, right? So that's something we have to use in this. We got to use a while loop, all right? So let's go ahead and actually build this. So I'm going to define a new function. I'm going to call this calculator, all right? And we're not going to have any inputs here because we don't need to have inputs, because again, we already have the functions that are going to run this calculation here. And I'm sure there are different ways to do this, but this is just how I think I can do this, honestly, right? So the first thing we want to do is we're going to receive the number from the user. So I'm just going to say number1, so equals, and we're going to, again, this is a very simple input. So obviously one thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that, remember, it's a float or integer. Like now in this case, I don't want to use an integer because calculators can also calculate floats, right? For example, 1.5 is a floating number. So we want to go with the float in this case. So I'm going to say float, and we're going to say input, and we're going to just define this. What is your first number? All right. So let's define this, and let's do that. All right. So again, this is essentially taking the first number as an input. And by the way, guys, one of the things I'm going to do is when you actually access this complete version, I'm going to add comments so you can understand exactly what's going on. All right. So so let's go ahead and continue. So one of the things I want to do is I want to start with a for loop. Now the idea with this is that we want to print the operations available to the user. All right. So I want to, like, when they enter this, like, first number, let's say 10, for example, I want them to see all the available operations that they can actually do. And the way we can do this is that we can actually pull it from the operations dictionary. So I can just pull the keys from this dictionary. All right. So what I want to do is I'm going to say for symbol, all right, in operations, let me just copy that so we don't have to type it. There you go. So for symbol in operations, and we're going to say print symbol. So essentially what this is going to do is going to loop through this dictionary and get all the key values. If you remember when we were talking about, for loops, and especially the way you use for loops in a in a dictionary, remember I mentioned that a for loop essentially just prints the entire key of a dictionary. So like if you have a for loop that runs through a dictionary, it doesn't print a value, it prints a key. So that's how we actually are printing the key here. All right. So another thing I want to do is, before we write our while loop, because we need to have a while loop to runs through the calculation, right? Keeps calculating this thing. So before we do that, we want to make sure that we keep track of the end of the program. Okay. So again, that's how we're going to do it. I want to make sure that, the user wants to continue. So the idea with this is that, we want to define a variable that will be used to determine if the calculation should continue. All right. So I'm going to actually go with a Boolean value in this case. I'm going to say should continue. All right, equals true. So that would be our Boolean value. All right. So again, that's something we're going to use later on to end the program essentially. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and create our while loop. All right. So I'm just going to actually indent in real quick. And this is yellow because we actually haven't used these. So like, that's why you see them yellow. All right. So I'm going to say while should continue is true. Let's just copy this. I don't have to. And while should continue is true, what I'm going to do, again, it's just while this whole thing is running, again, because if you don't actually have a reason to close a loop, that loop is going to run forever and it's going to cause problems, right? So you want to have something that can potentially end that loop. So that's why we have this. So while this is true, what we're going to do is we're going to take the operation as a name. So we're going to actually ask for the operation symbol. So like what user wants to do essentially. Do they want to add something? Do they want to subtract something? So I'm going to call this operation symbol, and we're going to say input and pick an operation. All right. So again, this is basically what is happening so far, is that we got the first number and then we showed all the potential symbols that they can do, right? The operations that they can perform essentially. And they will actually see now they see the message that says, hey, pick up an operation. What do you want to do? And then we're going to say, ask for another input. So after that, after they enter that, we're going to say num2, okay? And we're going to say float. And this is again the second number they want to calculate, right? So input, what is the next second number? All right. So just like that, we can say what's the second number and takes the second number as an input. Very simple. Let's actually make this a little bit nicer. There you go. Pick an operation. There you go. So we got our second numbers. Now let's actually, define the calculation function. Okay. Now this is really, really important. This is where things get a little bit tricky. So what I want to do is I want to define the calculation function as the function that corresponds to the operation symbol. So how do we actually know based on what they entered, what do we do? All right. So how do we get that number? All right. So I'm going to define a function called calculation, or a variable called calculation. It's just calculation. Sorry for my, horrible calculation function. And we're going to say operation. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab this and put it right here. So the idea with this is that what we're going to do is that based on what they entered, we're going to grab the value of this, key inside this dictionary. So that's what we're doing. So we defined a new variable, right? And something that we're going to use later on. And what are we doing is that I'm going to say, based on what they entered here in the symbol they entered here, give me that, that value. So whether it's subtract, multiply, and divide. So because when we have that, we can actually call this function based on what they want, right? So now that we have that, we have what they exactly want, right? What we're going to do is we're going to say answer equals calculation function, right? And we're going to say num1, and num2, just like that. So now we essentially called these functions, guys. So we called this function, one of these functions based on what the user entered. So I hope this makes sense, right? So we got the first number, and then we got an operation, and we said, hey, okay, we got the second number as well, and we say based on this operation that they entered, look inside this dictionary, okay? And if they, for example, say plus, you want to choose add. All right, so that's the value we want to pick. All right, so for example, if the user enters plus, what we're going to do is that we're going to look inside the dictionary and says, okay, so this plus equals add. This is the value of this key inside this dictionary. So now this add, we want to use it and call this function. So see, very simple. So we use this function to call another function essentially. So that's, again, that's how it goes. So now that we have the answer, because again, we called the function, right? So we get the calculation function and, number1, number2, right? So now that we have the answer, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to let's print it. So let's print, and I'm going to use an F string. So I'm just going to say num1, and let's close that, and let's just make it prettier. And again, let's get the operation symbol. So I'm just going to say operation symbol, this one. All right, so operation symbol and num2, right, equal answer. So just like that, what I did was I'm printing these values. I'm saying number1, based on the operation you chose, number2, for example, if they say 1 plus 2 equals 3. So the answer would be 3. So just like that, we print this, and this should work. All right. Now, the next part that I want to design here is that I want to see if the user, want to do something with this number. So we can actually use an if statement. Okay, let's go indent in. I'm going to say, and I'm cleaning, separating this because I want us to understand this better. So I'm going to say if input, and let's ask for another input. And we're going to say an F statement. We're going to use an F string. Okay, and we're going to say, type y, okay, to continue calculating with answer. So that's the number we got. Or type n, or that stands for no, to start a new calculation. So just like that, we have that. So let's actually, let's close that input real quick. All right, so just like that, guys, we have our input. So let's actually add this, and we're going to say if this input equals, we're going to say if this input equals, let's see, yes. Well, actually, I'll do it up here. Equals yes. What we're going to do is we're going to say num1 equals answer. So the thinking with this, and let me actually do the other part, else we're going to say should continue equals false. And what we're going to do is we're going to clear, and we're going to call our calculate function again. So here's what I did. So we got the answer here, and we printed, okay, this is your answer. You're welcome, right? So now we're going to say, we're going to ask a question. We're going to say, hey, type Y to continue calculating with, for example, 10 that you got in the previous, answer, or type N to start a new calculation. So if the user types Y, what we're going to do is we're going to say number1 equals answer. So again, if you remember in the beginning, what we do is we get number 1, right? But in this case, because the user wants to continue, what we're going to do is that we're going to turn this number1 to an answer, to the answer. So that way we already have that number, right? So we already have that number, and we're going to continue asking the second question, all right? And then, but if they don't want to, if they enter no, we're just going to clear it and go back and do this from the beginning. So I hope that made sense, guys. Let's actually go ahead and save this and run this. Hopefully we don't get any errors. Okay, let's see. So it needs to install something. This actually might be a problem. Let's see if it actually gets through. Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that is going to happen as we create a more complicated program is that we're gonna have this issue where we're gonna end up like overflowing Replic's CPU, because Replit is a free service, and they provide a very limited amount of like processing power to you when you create your programs. So it's designed to be like a kind of a test tool, not really a tool for you to fully develop something here. So, and as you see, because this is a more complicated program, and as we're getting into more complicated things, we're not going to be able to really run it on Replit efficiently. I'm sure there are ways to do it on Replit, but it's just not efficient. And this is something I'm going to get into later on in the next section, something we're going to talk about very, very heavily. But I want to use Visual Studio Code. So for you to actually, you can access Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio Code by downloading it. It's a free tool. And again, I will talk about this fully in the next section, so don't worry about it. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this code so we can just see if it runs. So just copy that, and let's just run it. All right, let's just bring it up here. There we go. So I see our code is running, and we'll get this message. What's the first number? I'm going to put 10, and it's going to ask for an operator. I'm just going to say, for example, plus. What's the next number? I'm going to say, let's say 20. So there you go. We're going to get 30 as a result. So I'm going to say type yes to continue calculating with 30. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to say yes or Y, and then pick an operation. I'm going to say, for example, plus. And what's the next number? I'm going to say 10. And there you go. So we got 40. So just like that, we fix this. And again, if I say no or N, we're going to end this program. So it's going to say go to the top, which is going to ask for the first number. So just like that, and this is how it works, guys. The code runs. Again, I'm going to talk about Visual Studio Code in the next section. We're going to get into IDEs and all sorts of other stuff, because again, I want us to move away from Replit to just make our life a lot easier. All right, guys. So I'll talk about that. But as I said, this is running, and one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to actually comment this out for you guys. So I'm going to like add the comments and everything, so you kind of understand exactly what we're doing and what is the purpose of every line here. So in case if you want to understand it better, that's one way to go about it. Let me know if you have any questions, guys, and I'll see you in the next videos, the next section.